Inflation is a very interesting concept. It's one of those things that takes away from you and you may not even notice it. Right now, there is a lot of conversations around the rising cost of living. The fact that the prices of goods and services is increasing. The amount of money you are spending getting your electricity or paying for your fuel or buying foods and foodstuff in the markets is also becoming a concern. You may have noticed that the amount of money that you get some certain items is no longer enough. You need to add more money. And all this is happening because of this whole idea that is called inflation. In simple terms, inflation refers to an increase in the prices of goods and services in the economy. This happens because of a number of reasons. And inflation, you need to understand what causes it. And the greatest cause of inflation in an economy is actually supply of money. Supply of money basically means the total amount of coins and cash and paper money that exists in the economy. This is something that central banks and Federal Reserve in the United States regulate. It is one of the bigger laws that this institution do, which is to manage how money supply is working in the economy. So if you are to go and study finance, you would come across those terms of M1 and M2. And that's the role of central bank to manage that within an economy. And they will employ or use several instruments to do it, but all allowed two major ideas or policy interventions. One is the expansionary and the other one is contractionary. All these are aimed at trying to tame inflation. In theory, an increase in the supply of money in the economy should lower the interest rate. And when that happens, it means that there is more available money that can be deployed into investments. And again, when there are more investments into the economy, it ends up leading to a situation whereby you get more money into your pocket. Which is why some of the interventions that you may have witnessed or that are happening right now are a bit curious. Because when you look at what central banks are doing is that they are increasing the interest rates. What that means is that as they try to control the existing inflation, they are also slowing down the economy. And that can be a bit of a tricky situation because already we are dealing with an economy that was not doing very well. The economy was already on a downward spiral, and not just the local one. You look at the whole globe, you will realize that the economies have not been performing well since 2020. So when you have the interventions that end up slowing down the economy more, you start wondering whether we are making the right policy interventions. Because if you look at the history of economics and inflation, you'll come to a realization that every time the economies have had an issue with inflation, it has been preceded by a cycle of economic boom where the economies were performing well, businesses were performing very well, people had a lot of money, and that generally has given or had given to a rise in the cost of goods and services because there was a great deal of need for them, there was money to buy them, people are happy, and that kind of an economic boom always led to higher inflation, and the intervention of increasing interest rates by central banks and Federal Reserve has always worked. But as I mentioned, this time looks a little bit different because we are not coming from a season of economic activity. We are not coming from a season of an economic boom. We are coming from a point where the economies were not performing very well. So when you have higher inflation, cost of goods and services are rising, and then you have a slow, or a slowing economy, it's possible to understand why the current interventions are being made. Because if you are to look at it, in 2020 when the world suffered the pandemic, most of the economies and most of the governments and central banks ended up printing money. This was money that was either sent to citizens to kind of caution them, but also was provided for with regard to other interventions like subsidies and all that. So you are giving people money in an economy when there is no work being done. And that is probably why we are in the situation we are right now. Because normally, when you have a situation like this, you would expect the central banks to actually reduce or lower the interest rates so that it can stimulate economic activity, businesses to borrow more money, and that can get the economy humming again. But right now, you have lowered interest rates, you have high inflation, and you have economy that is going into a recession or that is already in recession. That's a very unusual economic situation to be in. It's an experiment that I don't know how it will turn out because those things don't go together. But at the same time, like I mentioned, you need to understand where they are coming from. There's a great deal of money in the economy. A lot of it was printed money, and that needs to be mopped out. And if you look at them, the total amount of money that could have been printed in a global economy that is roughly around $85 trillion, you're looking at money that has been pumped or money that should be pumped out of the to the tune of almost 30 to 35 trillion dollars. That is not money that will be mopped out in the next 6 or 1 year. It's something that could take 2, 3, or even 4 years to get out of the system, which is probably why a lot of people are worried and have predicted that this particular situation that we are in could be a little bit longer than we expect. And that's why it is important for you to understand this whole big picture. Because if you understand it, then you are going to take collective measures. You are going to take personal decisions that take this into account, that the current economic situation may not end soon. We may end up being in this economic situation for a very long time. And if that's the case, then you need to look at your own personal budget and figure out if things or the cost of things is going up, which areas can I reduce to ensure that I can be able to afford the basic needs and the things that I need to enjoy life. At the same time, you may also need now to start thinking of how to earn extra money. Which ways or which avenues can you leverage to generate extra income to cover for what the inflation is making you lose? All these are things that are very critical when it comes to trying to figure out and understand how this whole inflation does not mess up your finances. Cost of goods and services increases. This is going to affect your budget. It means that if you have a fixed amount of money, you are going to get less items with that particular money. So you need to be able to figure out a way to either reduce the amount of things that you need or increase the amount of money that you are earning, so that then you can be able to cover or buy all the goods and services that you have been buying in the past. This is critical because if you do not do this, having a high inflation or high inflation rate in a country can cause a great deal of financial stress. And you probably have felt the pressure of not affording all the things that you have been affording in the past. So yes, inflation is going to affect your budget. It's going to affect your money. It's going to affect the goods and services that you can be able to buy or afford over the next coming months, probably coming years. But if you take collective measures early, if you understand how this whole thing is working, it's possible to be able to survive the whole crisis. It's possible to be able to go through this with an understanding of the things that are taking place. And I would recommend that you take time to read more about inflation, understand more about interest rates, and not just what is happening in your country, but also try and understand what is going on a global level. That way you'll be able to have a bigger picture which you can apply at a micro level and be able to not be stressed or have anxiety about what is going on.